You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, greetings, everyone. You're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I am Doug Thorpe, your host, and it's a pleasure to be back with you today. I have a guest that I found who has a very interesting twist on the coaching game. As many of you who listen know, I certainly am myself a business coach and executive leadership development professional, but there are many different ways that we as coaches can try to reach our clients and help those that we serve. And my guest today has a very, very interesting twist on that. Her name is Erin Whalen. And Erin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Doug. Thank you for having me.
So I want to let you kind of tell the story of what this very interesting alternative way of doing things may be. And as is tradition on our show, we usually start with a bit of your backstory. What were you doing that led you to go into what you're doing now?
So it's all connected, right? So what I was doing prior to coaching was I was a freelance actor in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and I'm still dabbling in it a little bit, but I've been doing that quote unquote full time since 2006. So, the bulk of my income has come from different various acting gigs and opportunities. And what I noticed was there was a lot of opportunity out there that people aren't necessarily even aware of when you think of acting. So, for instance, one of the things that I started to do a lot of was I was working at various medical institutions. They hire actors, specifically med schools do this. They hire actors to play patients so that future doctors and future nurse practitioners and future RNs, different medical professionals, future medical professionals can practice having some more challenging conversations in that safe environment when they're practicing with someone who's pretending to be a patient before they're actually out there practicing medicine as a full-fledged doctor. So I did a lot of that. I still do some of that. And I was getting to the point where I was invited to train other actors for this type of work. And I really loved it. And I really loved the hard stuff. I was invited to train actors for some of the more challenging roles that they were playing. So it could be someone who was a victim of domestic violence or someone who was receiving a bad news, some kind of diagnosis. So they were learning how to break bad news to a patient. So I really found that those more challenging conversations were really where my heart was. Like how cool is it that actors can help future doctors? Like I never knew that existed.
Really?
Yeah. So fast forward to, when I founded my business, it took me a long time. I founded my business in the fall of 2020. And it wasn't until maybe a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago that I really decided, oh, wait a minute. Like I'm beyond a life coach. Like, yes, I did my training in becoming a life coach, but what I have my background in is more communication skills coaching. So, I've been doing that type of work for a very long time. And then I went through the coaching certification program so that I can add that to my arsenal. But I'm really using these acting skills in a way and combining them with my coaching skills to help people communicate more effectively and compassionately.
Well, I'm thinking of one modality that we use in coaching, and that is doing the role play.
Yeah.
And oftentimes coaches, and I've done it countless times with my own clients, we assume a persona. Maybe it's a boss that somebody's having trouble with, or maybe it's a coworker or direct report they're having trouble with, and you play it out. And it's funny you bring it up because I've always thought, as effective as I think that is, I certainly do not consider myself an actor. And, my ability to probably effectively emote, whatever is there for the moment. But we seem to get through it, so it's okay. But it's very interesting, and I'm going to be honest. I don't know that I've ever heard someone describe the packaging of the service the way you've got it. So it must be a very compelling value proposition when you go to these institutions and work with people like that.
Yeah, I think it has the upside of being very innovative, and it has the downside of being very innovative because some people are not willing to take the risk on something that, you don't necessarily have an experience with or an understanding of, because, we now know more about, what a leadership coach does, what an executive coach does. But when we're looking at, hey, I'm going to bring in my professional role players who've been doing this for, a dozen years, who've been professional actors that can go into whoever the persona is and be that person. Because I know when we do it as coaches, and I've been a professional role player for a long time too. I'll never forget the first time I did both the facilitating, like the coaching with a group, and the role playing. I took like a 4-hour nap afterwards, Doug. I was like spent, and I like done professional role playing for a long time. So I find that, I bring in my role players so that I can focus on the facilitation and the coaching and kind of holding that space for everyone present. And then I bring someone in who's going to only be doing the role playing component. But a lot of companies are like, I don't know. Oh, we do role playing too. And it's like, yes, you do. And yet, like, here's this other piece of people who do it professionally and can really become, then here's the other thing, like, we can't unknow what we know, right? So like, as a coach, we can't unknow these ways of doing things. We can't, say you're, in real estate and you're like, I'm a real estate agent and I know everything about real estate, but I'm going to pretend that I'm a home buyer. It's like, you can't do it as effectively as someone who can step into that role and really empty themselves of themselves so that they can fully be that home buyer and have the skill set to do it in a way that they're also paying attention to, okay, I'm going to talk about this when we debrief it. I'm going to talk about this. I'm clocking what's happening right now. Right now I'm feeling dismissed, or right now I'm feeling discouraged, or right now I'm feeling talked down to. And I'm going to remember that moment so that I can talk about it later. That takes a certain level of skill set that, I've been doing it for a long time. And I applaud you, Doug, because like, I have a hard time going into role play when I'm coaching someone. So for you to do it, wow, way to go.
Well, again, I want to accentuate, I certainly do it because I think there are moments when it's a very appropriate way to reframe a situation. And a couple of examples that come to mind when I've got a client who, let's say, is lamenting a struggle with their boss. So the classic question is, gee, Doug, how do I manage up the organization? And that in and of itself is a topic for a whole nother episode, because I philosophically don't agree that that's an opportunity. I don't think you can technically manage up. You can influence and you can inspire and you can participate, but you're not going to change behaviors going up the hill.
Yeah.
But that aside, what I'll do, I'll ask my client, let's role play a minute. And they immediately go to, well, Doug's going to be my boss and I'm going to be me and I'm going to, try to make this case. But what I do, I put it on them. I say, okay, you be the boss. You show me what you're dealing with.
I love it.
And I'll be you, and I will play out what I believe, perhaps another or a different response can be to the moment.
Oh, I love that.
And it's interesting. There are byproducts of that. I have had clients go through that process, and then they'll say, maybe I need to give my boss some slack. I didn't think about how challenging this can be, and now that I have to kind of, sort of, what do you call it, symbolically step in their shoes,
Yes.
I maybe need to think about this differently.
Yeah. I love that because they have now taken on that perspective and they have a renewed sense of what it must be like from the boss's perspective, and you gave them that opportunity. That's beautiful. It's empathy. I love it.
So when you go into these moments, I mean, I'm thinking about a lot of different things, and I love what you said about bringing the players in who can sort of measure and clock the events and the responses so they can provide feedback later. I think that's such a critical part of this process. I mean, we can role play, we can game play, we can do all these simulations, but without collecting the data points to have meaningful discussions, I think a lot gets lost. And quite frankly, that's probably why companies in general, pause when they think about this proposition. Let's bring in an actor to work through our communication scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really key, is that's the beauty of it, that someone can say, okay, this is what I was feeling when you said this or when you did this. And it really is learnable, improvable skills that we're talking about, right? Because it really comes down to objective behaviors, things that we can notice that someone is doing or saying. Like, for instance, you're looking intently, you're engaged. If we were in person, you would be making eye contact with me right now, and you're nodding your head. And so, as you're nodding your head and as you're attempting to make eye contact and as you're smiling as I'm talking, Doug, I feel listened to. Right. And so we can talk through that and say, oh, okay. So, like, generally speaking, nodding along as someone is talking, smiling at appropriate times, making eye contact, those are skills that help people feel listened to. And so it's about the feedback, and it's also about making it repeatable, making it something that people who are observing can also say, oh yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that they sighed relief when that happened. Oh, a sigh of relief usually means someone feels more comfortable, or someone feels relieved, or whatever it is. And so yeah, I think the feedback is really the crucial part, and it is a real skill set to be able to say, like, yes, I am your person, whoever you want to practice having that conversation with, and I'm also like I said before, like, clocking those moments, and I'm in the moment. I'm like fully that person. And yet there's this other part of me that's ready to talk about it later. Like, that is a whole other level of skill set that my role players bring to it. That is just so important, because we rarely get that feedback, right? We think about companies, you think about exit interviews. You're like, why did you wait until now to tell me this, thing?
Right.
But why can't we get the feedback sooner and learn how we're communicating, learn how we're coming across? Because a lot of it could actually just be, a miscommunication. Oh my gosh, I didn't intend to be dismissive. I didn't intend for that to happen. So getting that feedback from an unbiased, uninvolved, yet fully embodied person can really help.
So you mentioned the scenario with the medical schools and doing this role play with aspiring doctors. But when we flip it over to the business side, not that medical schooling is not a business, but I mean more of a corporate setting, I'm an engineer and I've got a team of engineers I have to manage. How do you typically set that up for them, or what might be the ask when someone comes calling to you and wants to explore solutions for that?
So it's really about getting into their world, right? Because you're right, medicine is different from engineering, and yet there's a lot the same, right? So when we're talking about teaching communication skills with this interactive type of modality, it's a lot of the same things that we end up talking through. We talk about active listening. We talk about empathy. We talk about taking on that other person's perspective, like you said earlier, with in your own experience with coaching, that they got this new perspective of what the boss must be going through. But you really do have to understand that world, right? You really do have to understand, okay, what is the day-to-day life of the engineer? What is the challenge? What is is it that you're having a challenge within the team? Is it that you're having a challenge with clients? Is it that you're having a challenge with vendors? Like, who are we talking about? What is that like? And so because communication skills are just part of our humanity, the focus of like, I want to work on empathy is like, okay, the role player can go into it pretty quickly, but it does take some crafting and some understanding to know what that particular industry is like. So it's a little bit of both. It's both kind of meta, and then like meta, hey, we all need empathy. And then it's more granular of, well, tell me more about your life and give me insight as to what you all are going through and what you're struggling with. Because I think it's important, I never go in as like, this is the program. It's like, no, I need you to tell me what your life is like so that I can create programming that will help support you in what you're dealing with and what you're challenged by.
When you go in and begin working with a group, to what degree do you see the influence of sort of classic personality assessment? You think of the DISC and the Myers-Briggs and the introverts versus extroverts and all those various combinations. And I know Myers-Briggs gets into the empathy part. Some people are prone to be more empathetic than others just because of their core personalities. How do you see that playing out in what you have to do?
It plays out, but I never want to go into it with that being the only thing that I'm thinking of, because it's important to be able to say, okay, this person says they're an introvert, and I have a level of knowledge about what that means. And yet I don't want to ever dismiss that person and their introversion based on my own biases, right? So it helps to have a little bit of the framework and to have that knowledge. And yet everyone is just so unique. I remember there's someone very close to me that when I was first starting to get into medical education and communication skills and empathy, I was like, I'm going to empathize with this person. And like, I was doing all the things, right? I was doing textbook empathy. And they were like, no, like, I hate when you do that. It's not working. And I'm like, no, this is how you use empathy. And they're like, no, like, don't do that with me. So like, even and this was someone I'm very close to and know a lot about. And so it's okay to have the framework, but I don't let that dictate how things are going to go, because everyone has their own unique flavor and responses. And, we're only there for a snapshot of time. Like, this person has a whole history of what their life has been like and how they were raised and what the current dynamic at the company is, and, their own internal dialogue. And, there's just so much that I can never go in assuming that I have full knowledge of someone. That would be really, really shallow of me to think that.
Well, you bring up a good point, and I'm going to shift gears just slightly on that lead. What comes to mind as you were describing your friend, there's a lot of work that's been done and books have been published about the so-called 5 love languages. And there's extension of that thinking that I think goes into business communication.
Yeah.
You may be a very well-intended, high-principled, and high-integrity leader, but you're going to find that people you're talking to in your organization and on your team are just not connecting with what you're putting out there.
Yep.
And it takes a little bit of exploration to discover that, people do receive things differently. And using the principle of the 5 love languages, you may be breaking your neck trying to make your loved one appreciate you and feel warm and nurtured and everything, but you're not speaking the right language.
Oh my gosh. I'm a huge Gary Chapman fan. And the fact that you brought up the love languages is just so key. And I think that's so true. And I think that there's absolutely a parallel with our work life because, and communication is a two-way street. It's never like, oh, I did the thing and they misunderstood me and it's their fault. It's, well, let's look at your messaging. Let's look at how you did it. Let's look at the words you use. Let's look at your tone, all of your nonverbals. Just because they misunderstood doesn't mean that it's 100% their fault. It's both. And so with the love languages too, yeah, how do you find out how that other person receives love? And it's important to speak that language to them. And so, yeah, there may be employee benefit programs or accolades that people don't care about. People may absolutely not care about, the shout out email. They may really want, donuts on Fridays or, whatever it is. Like, you have to find out what your employees and what your team respond to. And it's going to be different. You're not going to end up with an entire team that says, yes, donuts on Friday are absolutely everything that we want in life. And then we're good. Like, it's going to vary person to person. So you have to take the time to get to know your people.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's DougThorpe.com.
So with that said, I would love to get your take, and you kind of alluded to it just now. You were talking about the communication being a two-way street, and when someone is not receiving, it's not totally on them, but it's on the leader to be able to sense that and maybe reshape it and go at it again. There's I'm going to get your take on that. There's a principle that I try to tell leaders when I'm working with them about communication that I think goes forgotten or unknown, or people aren't dialed into it. And that is that in my way of thinking, communication is ultimately a 4-part exercise. And real quick, without belaboring each one, it starts with the idea in your head. You're the leader. You've got a thought that you need to communicate to a person or your team. So you bubble that up, and then you start trying to present it. That's step 2. Whether it's spoken or written, you're putting it out there. But first breakdown happens. How many of us have had the moment where we've thought something, we've said something, and you go, ooh, that didn't come out like I was thinking about it. and so you want to reel it back in because it doesn't jive with what you were really trying to do. But that gets it out of your head and then into the air around, and the person receiving it becomes step 3 and 4. And step 3 is just the basic receptor that somebody has, which you can think of it as kind of a filter. They're sort of assessing and managing and blocking through whatever it is you're saying, and their filter may be cloudy or maybe somehow askew. And right there, it starts to break down. So that's the classic lost in translation kind of idea. We see it in bilingual, multilingual people trying to communicate, and maybe they don't get a nuance of a phrase in the other language correct, and the audience is going, what? But then here's a really important one. Step 4 is your recipients processing how they absorb what it is they heard or saw. And I use the issue that people have trigger words. You know, just hearing a word can send them off in very bad directions or dark places. So the word you might have used in your message might be that trigger word for one of your people. And in the moment, you might be able to see that going on in a little bit of reaction and body language and facial expression and such, like, what is that? Well, one of those two steps is having a problem. But I encourage leaders to realize that they have skin in the game for all four parts. And while the last two are not exclusively on them, I argue that they need to be sensitive as leaders, that there can be breakdown in the communication. And as the old phrase goes, a confused mind says no. If this person you're working for, working with, or perhaps it's a client, or in the case of a doctor, a patient, if you see them not processing correctly, that is ultimately a form of confusion. And in their mind and ultimately in their spirit, they're going to say, nope, not going there, not doing it, not buying it.
I love that 4-part framework. I think it's spot on. I would just add, just as the receiver has a filter, the speaker, the leader in this case, has a filter too. Like the way that they're communicating in step 2 is going through their filter. And I love this. And I love how you ensure that the leader is still present for step 3 and 4. Because sometimes the temptation is to be like, well, I did it. I sent the memo. I had the conversation. I did the one-on-one. I'm done. My part is done. But being curious and open to the recipient's response is part of the conversation. It should never be, I said this and you heard it, the end. It should be a dialogue. And so I love how you said, it could be a look of confusion, a squint, a crossing of the arms. It could be some sort of nonverbal reaction, and so being open to that and having the leader say something along the lines of, okay, I just shared some big news. What are you thinking? Right? Or how are you feeling? Or some kind of open-ended question to get the recipient to open up. And also, I think, considering that step 4 happens at different stages. So the processing is going to happen. It's going to start happening in that moment, but it's going to continue. That processing. And some people are deep processors, and that processing may take a longer time. And so, just because you had the conversation on Tuesday doesn't mean by Wednesday it's wrapped up. Like, that person might be processing until next Tuesday and need another check-in and need another, hey, what are your thoughts on what we talked about? Because a lot of us, myself included, sometimes it's going to take a while for that message to really sink in and go through. So I might even email you later, Doug, and be like, I was thinking about the 4-stage process you talked about, and I have some more thoughts. Like, I could very well email you in a week and share that with you, or a month.
I hope you do. I think I do think it's such a vital part in a leadership toolkit to have that extra dimension of your understanding of what it means to be a good communicator, because there's no doubt if you're in a role of leadership, you're going to have different settings. You're going to have the one-on-ones, you're going to have the small group, you're going to have large group. You might have up level, down level, all various forms, and you might feel very compelled to seriously adjust your communication style depending on that circumstance. But I do caution my clients about taking that style change too far. I mean, for instance, and this is kind of a radical example, but just to get the point, if you're generally an introvert, you're kind of that quiet, calm leader, and that's your persona for the people immediately around you that know you best. And you choose to get up in front of an audience like a town hall of some sort, and you come across as the vibrant, bubbly cheerleader type, people are going to be going, what? Who? No, 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 no.
Yes.
Stop. And it kind of breaks down before it ever gets started.
Yes. I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And to know our limits as leaders, right? I think that's important. And to say, okay, I'm the leader, and yet I don't have to be the one to get up at the town hall. My right hand man or woman is, the one who can carry that. I'm gonna let them lead in that moment because they're more suited to that. I think that's an excellent point. And I remember, because I'm an introvert, like strongly, like a very strong introvert. And I remember, speaking of like the different personality types, Myers-Briggs, DISC, all that stuff. For a long time, I was really into the 4 temperaments. I don't know if you're familiar with the 4 temperaments, but I had a moment of like crisis because I always would describe myself as a sanguine melancholic, because, the melancholic tends to be the an introverted type, but holds on, like really has like a longevity to their processing, has a longevity to their experiences. And the sanguine is like just bubbly, joyful, out there, extroverted. Yeah. And I always thought I was both. And then I had this like moment of crisis. I was reading in a book and it said, if you like, those are polar opposite temperaments. So if you can't be both. Now, granted, I don't know, maybe you can, but like, I had this moment where I was like, oh, what do you mean I can't be both? Like, and then I realized, oh, no. Like, and the book said like, one of them is a mask. You're wearing a mask. And I was like, oh no, like I am wearing the sanguine mask. Like I am trying to be bubbly, happy, extroverted when that is not my true nature. And so I've really learned how to embrace like, nah, I'm an introvert and I enjoy the one-on-ones and I enjoy, being by myself and the leadership aspect of, leading a team or leading, a group is harder for me. And so I have to accommodate that myself. I have to say, I prefer to co-lead. Like if I'm going to facilitate a session, I prefer to bring in a co-facilitator because I know that's going to allow me to be the best version of me and to give the best offering to the people that need me that day.
Yeah. Very interesting. And maybe it's an obvious question, but that's interesting. You describe that mask. Isn't that what acting is all about?
Yes. I mean, yes and no. It's, there are different theories. Like, are you a method actor? Are you like Daniel Day-Lewis, who like becomes the person he's portraying? So there are levels, but, it really, I personally think, and as far as the acting that I do these days, which is more like the role playing and playback theater, it really is more for me about stepping into the humanity of that person. And, I don't know what it's like to be a Black man in the US, but I do know what it's like to be, feeling overlooked or, feeling unsafe or, whatever it is. So like, I can't step into someone's persona completely, but I can step into emotions. I can step into our shared humanity. I can step into my own life experiences that are similar to the ones that I'm portraying. Yeah.
Side note here, and I've for some time have argued the majority of actors, and I think about the big screen, really famous Hollywood people. I argue that I don't think they take roles too far off of who they really are. Now there are some obvious exceptions to that have played a wide range of characters and that's probably the true upper echelon of that skill and talent. But but generally, when you plot the body of work that people have done, like, there are a lot of actors that have had wonderful careers, but they kind of get slotted in pretty much the same personas.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that theory. I think you're onto something, Doug.
and on one hand, it provides some credibility of the character.
Mm-hmm.
But there are those that have famously done 180s and taken on some really big challenges and things in what they do and how they did it. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I just recently finished Matthew McConaughey's book, and I thought the story about his preparation for Dallas Buyers Club that got him the Oscar. His idea, he needed to lose 50 something pounds to be able to portray that character. And he had this rigorous diet that was awful. I couldn't imagine going 2 days with what he was doing. 3 egg whites in the morning, 5 ounces of fish and vegetables at lunch, and all the wine he could drink.
Oh my gosh.
That was his diet for 6 months.
Terrible.
And I'm like, oh goodness. But applause for the commitment to make it happen, and of course the rest is history. And he did pull it off, and did quite well in that role. But
yeah, I want to read that book. It's on my want to read list.
Well, what I'll say to the crowd here, it's a good one. You have to be prepared. Matthew's Matthew. He's rough around some of the edges, and the book is likewise. So guard your ears and heart if strong language is a problem for you. But it's not overwhelming. It just it's interspersed in seemingly appropriate moments. So. You just get the persona there. But no, it actually is an uplifting book. I mean, his ultimate story of love for family and his passion for being a dad and doing what he does comes through pretty loud and clear.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one other thing. It's totally shifting gears. In your experience, what about the generational impact of challenges with communication?
Oof. Wow. That is a big question. Tell me more what you're thinking with that, Doug.
Well, I'm thinking of it. It's not uncommon that I go into a place and a very senior leader or a company owner who is late 40s, 50s, even in the 60s, is sitting there saying, I'm really struggling with my millennials and all the young people in my operation. They just don't communicate the way I do. We can't seem to ever connect properly. And, it's driving me crazy. And then you go talk to them kind of in a form of a 360, and they're saying the exact same thing. My boss doesn't understand me. I can't seem to get across what I'm thinking and how I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And part of me, just for what it's worth, I argue a bit of another contrarian position. They're just people. You just need to have that. Peel away all the business load that you've got and go meet them where they are.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I think that's the solution, because we've probably had this challenge, from the beginning of time, to be honest, because especially in this day and age, things with technology change so fast. And I think that has affected the way we communicate. I mean, think of how things have been abbreviated even since texting came along, and how, we can have an entire conversation just with acronyms. And so, communication cannot help but be impacted by the advances in technology. And generationally, I think you're absolutely right that there is an apparent disconnect, but it is really about meeting people where they are. I think that's the solution, Doug. And I think that it is about, getting to know, just like we were saying earlier, like getting to know how your team communicates, what's their love language, so to speak. What do they appreciate? What do they want? Do they want a bonus, or do they want donuts on Friday? Do they want a shout out at the town hall, or do they want to lead the town hall? Like what are the things that speak to them? And I think that if there is more open dialogue and vulnerability too, it does take vulnerability for the boss who's, maybe a generation or two higher above the millennials. Like, it does take some vulnerability for them to say, look, I really would love for us to connect. I really would love for us to have a, very thriving team, and where everyone feels that they're heard, and everyone feels that they're listened to and appreciated. So let's talk about that. Like, how do you accept appreciation? Like, what are you looking for? What are you trying to tell me that I'm not hearing? I think approaching it with vulnerability and not a sense of defensive-ness, because it is about just meeting them where they are and finding out what's important to them.
Yeah. Well, and part of that is getting off the, as we say down here, the high horse of right versus wrong. I'm the boss, my way's right, and whatever you're doing is wrong until you start doing it my way. And that's a throwback to command and control. It's a throwback to very autocratic leadership, which I argue in the modern world is quickly on its way out the door.
Thank goodness.
And thank goodness. And I do think it is about having that vulnerability as the leader to just say, we're apparently not connecting here. Mm-hmm. And I'm open, I'm listening. Talk to me, explain what it is we're doing. The one caveat to that is I have had many people, and myself included, as I've gone out to try to work with younger so-called high potentials that are in companies and they're up and coming. And maybe this is a shout out that I'll make to those, younger folks in the work world. You too need to be authentic and real.
Yeah.
Because those of us that have been around for a while, we too have BS meters operating. And when you tell us something, we can tell whether you're being genuine or not. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if we do open up our side of the table and we're trying to be, genuinely authentic and laying that out there, don't mess us around with a lot of BS answer or try to create the answer you think we're looking for. If we tell you we're wanting an open discussion, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we all got to get real.
Yeah. And that goes back to what we were saying before about it being, a two-way street, that, everyone's responsible for that conversation and how it's coming across and how it's received. It's really important to, especially if someone's going to be vulnerable, it's really important to, accept that and not come back with a sense of their own armor or their, just disregarding that, like just a sense of not wanting to share or not being open back, because that's, and it's also about, making sure that the environment is a place where people feel that they can share openly. So, it has to be more than one attempt.
Right.
If you have a history
I agree.
of being, it being a toxic culture, it's going to take time before people feel that safety is genuine.
Right, for sure. And the whole idea of building a team culture on psychological safety and trust, that too is a whole nother episode.
Yeah, I know. We could talk for hours. Like,
we could really
cover.
get into it. But unfortunately, Erin, we're going to have to wrap this up. This has been wonderful, and I really appreciate you sitting in and going over this. Tell folks the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more.
Well, the best way, since I'm a one-on-one kind of gal, just send me an email. I can be reached at Erin, ERIN, @compassionatecoaching.org. My website is www.compassionatecoaching.org. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. It'll be in the show notes, I'm sure, because it's a little bit convoluted, but it's Erin Whalen, WHALEN compassionate coaching.
Great. Well, again, I really appreciate it. And yes, folks, all that info will be in the show notes as always. And this is the point of the show where I remind everybody we do have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. It's been a pleasure to work with you and share this moment. I hope you have taken some nuggets from this and can go out and apply these things in your own day-to-day. If you need help, call a coach. It's a great opportunity to get that independent sort of guide influence to help you become a better leader. So with that, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, and hope to see you again real soon.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.